the 10th Challenger launch, and a mission unlike any NASA had attempted before.
They decided to make that the first flight that an ordinary citizen can fly, and that drew a tremendous interest from the public, plus the school systems that were going to show this live on television.
At this time, I'd like to introduce you to perhaps the person you came to see, and that's Krista McCullough, our payload specialist, teacher in space.
My job at the time of the Challenger was the director of the Space Shuttle solid rocket motor project for my company, Morton Thiokol.
Morton Thiokol was an engineering firm out of Brigham City, Utah, and had the NASA contract to build the shuttle boosters.
Well, I am so excited to be here, and I just hope everybody tunes in on day 4 now to watch the teacher teaching from space.
On the day before Challenger, there was an overnight low that was record-breaking.
Got a telephone call from one of the program managers back in Utah that worked for me. And he says, Al, he says, we just heard that it might get down as low as 18 degrees by tomorrow morning. Good grief, I said, I'm really worried about these O-ring seals being able to operate properly at those kind of temperatures.
The mission had already been rescheduled after routine delays. So now, Morton Thiokol and NASA scheduled an emergency teleconference the night before the launch.
The engineers at Thiokol were very concerned, so they began scrambling to put together an analysis of temperature data.
Larry Malloy was NASA's project manager for the solid rocket boosters.
Then we went out to the teleconference, and Roger Boisjolet, who was kind of the O-ring czar at Morton Thiokol, did most of the talking. The recommendation was that we wait until it's 54 degrees before we launch. So I said something like, 54 degrees where?
They had never drawn a temperature line before, and it meant a tremendous change to the shuttle's schedule.
It isn't what they wanted to hear. In fact, Larry made a comment, Thiokol, when the hell do you want me to launch? Next April?
Thiokol's engineers in Utah were caught off guard by NASA's strong reaction to their recommendation, so they asked if they could have some time off the teleconference to review the data in private.
And after they went offline, Al McDonald was visibly upset. And he said, I wouldn't want to be the guy that had to appear at a board of inquiry if this thing blows. And I said, I understand that, Al, and you won't have to. That'll be me.
At Thiokol, the vice president was asking those engineers to stand up for what they said. Roger Boisjolet took the lead in the objections. He said, I can't prove it to you. All I know is that it's away from goodness in our experience space. But the engineers at Thiokol didn't have the data. So the vice president took the decision-making away from the engineers and asked the managers to decide.
And they did. More than 30 minutes after the engineers had gone offline, Thiokol managers voted to reverse the recommendation and to launch the Challenger as planned. The teleconference became a focal point for the White House-appointed Rogers Commission that investigated NASA after the disaster.
There was not one positive statement for launch ever made in that room.
What was driving you here? What was to be achieved that caused you to go?
NASA pressured the folks at Thiokol to change their mind. And it was clear to me that we finally came back and gave them what they wanted to hear.
You know, we've been rationalizing this erosion since the second flight.
None of the information the NASA managers were getting was new. This was not individuals getting used to something. This was organizationally supported.
That's where the accident was inevitable.
Once Thiokol reversed their initial recommendation, someone needed to sign off on the launch rationale.
I did the smartest thing I ever did in my lifetime. I refused to sign it. I just felt it was too much risk to take.
So just before midnight, McDonald's boss, Joe Kilminster, signed off instead. After the disaster, the commission concluded cold and joint design were major factors in Challenger's O-ring failure. It also squarely pointed a finger at NASA managers like Malloy.
The commission did recognize that there was pressure to launch, but they saw it enacted by amorally calculating managers who were in positions of responsibility. I found something completely different.
So Vaughn began her own investigation.
No one wanted this to happen, but intuition, I don't feel good about this, should have been okay. And they applied all the usual rules in a situation where the usual rules didn't apply.
4, 3, 2, 1.
We made a grievous error.
So the real crux of the matter is, how do you get people to recognize when you need to do something different than what you've been trained